what is going on, everybody? In this video I'm going to be going over how to deal with the mental stack, and like Luke just said, if you're feeling nervous about dealing with certain things in the game, I'm going to be breaking it down for you and making it a little bit easier to handle. With that being said, let's pull out the ever so trusty notepad. So I'm sure you're dealing with the mental stack, and in order to start off, we need to start off with what are your opponent's best attributes. Okay, so let's talk about Luke, right? Best attributes, at least they were, right? This button has gotten quite a bit of a nerf, but regardless, what are the buttons or things that he'll be doing on a day-to-day basis regardless of the actual opponent? Okay, we have to start there in order to understand where we need to go. All right, so what will he do? He will Sand Blast. He will sometimes fake Sand Blast, right? I call this a fake because it doesn't really go that far. And obviously, if you do like something like this, or right, if you do something like that, that's real. But outside of that, you're good. Okay. He will also low forward you, right? Crouching medium kick drive rush. A lot of them will do this because it leaves them +5 upon blocking opponents, right? These are just things that are bound to be, okay? +5 off of this instance. So what does our opponent want to do? Our opponent wants to be here, okay? Want to be running the offense, want to be running at you, making sure you have to guess, and eventually kill you with a couple of bombos here and there, right? Those are the focus upon what the character wants to do. Now, with that being said, you have to take it to the next level. I know there's a lot of thinking involved here, but I swear we'll get there. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you how to deal with said mental stack, okay? So with that being said, what can your character do about them, right? So in this case, right, there are different options. For in Manon's case, there are different things you can do. Some would say that they're very risky. I would agree, but let's say you're trying to deal with it, right? If your opponent's just trying to run at you, actually, let's do that a little bit different, or they actually go for the follow-up here. So what can we do about it is we can play that solid neutral game and understand that your opponent's goal is to just run at you, right? If you know that your opponent's goal is to just run at you, you either A, try to check the space, or B, keep this an appropriate amount of space between you and themselves, right? Because otherwise, if you just stand here and block, and then you're forced into this situation. So you can either A, try to check the space, right? Or B, try to keep an appropriate amount of range away from them, so that in the case that they do decide to press it, then they get punished for it. Obviously, this is only one of the things that he can do if we're looking at an opponent that likes to just throw fireballs all the time, right? Then we have to look at what we can do. And if we know that we have options, now we can force them into a situation in which they have to guess. So if you clicked on this video, I'm sure you need some help. Lord knows I did at some point. But here's the thing, you want your favorite content creators to come and help you. But let's be real, they're charging like $60 per hour. You don't need that. But when I got you good. Over on this channel, I do free coaching sessions on Tuesdays and on Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. EST. So what does that look like? I essentially go over your matches. I can give you tools so that you can succeed the next time you open up rank. So once again, join my Discord. Wait till I'm live either on Tuesdays or on Thursdays, 6:30 p.m. EST. Be there or be square. And yeah, I'm not your favorite pro, but I'm available. Those pros are not available. So once again, join the live, get better, and I'll help you improve. Back to the video, right? So it's all about making sure that we're managing the things that we see on a consistent basis, and then trying to use your options to try and deal with it, right? In some cases, let's say you're not Manon, right? Let's say we're a Jamie player. Okay, in the case that we're playing as Jamie, what can we do about this situation, right? Well, we can attempt to try and perfect parry the situation, right? by doing a little something like that. Okay, so what I'm doing, if you don't know what I'm doing, right, is I am attempting to failing, but attempting to perfect parry the fireball, so that in the case that I do perfect parry, if you look at my inputs, I'm already buffering forward dash. So if I'm in the case that I'm buffering forward dash, if I do normal, if I get normal parry, I don't get anything. However, if I do get the perfect parry attempt, then that's when I actually get the drive rush, right? It essentially helps you with dealing with said matchup, right? And then likewise, like I mentioned, if you want to try and stop him from just approaching and pressing and crouching medium kick, right, we want to be trying to check that space. So moving on, what is your opponent showing you? So what does that mean, right? There are a plethora of things that your opponent can do, right? They can jump at you, right? They can raw drive rush at you, right? They can just decide to zone, and then they can do the other two aforementioned options there. So how do you manage all of that thing? And then he also has this, right? And then how do you decide on what to look for or what to manage? It's a lot to look for, right? You got to look between jump, you got to look between raw drive rush, you got to look between your opponent doing this, right? Your opponent doing this, doing this, right? How do we manage it all? The answer to this is the fact that you have to assume that when you start with your opponent, they are a blank slate, okay? When your opponent is a blank slate, what you'll be jotting down on their blank slate are things they like to do, okay? Just because they do it once doesn't mean it goes down on this slate. But if you see your opponent consistently doing this because they like the plus frames afterwards, then that goes on the slate. If you notice that a lot of the time they're not really thinking, and anytime they're in a certain amount of range, they're just going for a jump into standing heavy punch or jumping heavy punch, that goes on the slate. If you notice that they'll keep throwing fireball, walking back as you approach them, and then eventually they'll just drive rush at you, that's something that goes on the list, right? So you create this little mental note of things that they're doing on a consistent basis. Okay, I know it's hard and it's going to be very challenging at first, but it's definitely something that you need to start doing. Once you build this mental note, okay, it's going to lead us into how to reduce our mental stack. Okay, once we know what these things are on our slate, okay, then we stop worrying about the other options that are not being shown. For instance, a lot of you platinum players are so worried about raw drive rush, crush, and medium punch, not knowing that your opponent doesn't even know how to do so. Why are you worried about it, Bo? Right? A lot of your opponents are like, oh, you know, I gotta be prepared for the jump, and then he just never jumps at you, right? Obviously, you should probably start to even if you can't necessarily enter your DP yet, you should at the very least be using your dedicated anti-air button. And if you don't have one, go up there and meet them. And I'm talking about you Marissa players, okay? Go up there and meet them up there, right? Same thing with Jamie. Jamie can meet them up there with the jumping heavy kick, right? So with that being said, you need to focus on the top two things that obviously, depending on your skill level, you can definitely increase these things. But as the lower you are, the less plans they have set up at a time. So it makes it a little bit easier. But this is what I'll say. Focus on the top two things that your opponent is most likely to do and hard focus them. The reason why we want to hard focus them is because they're going to be the things that they're going to gravitate towards. If we can stop the things they're gravitating towards, that's when they have to expand their options or die. Let me say that one more time. It's either they expand their options or you take the game, okay? Because a lot of your opponents are thinking on one dimension, okay? This is something that's really important and something I constantly have to remind myself, is that a lot of your opponents are playing on one dimension. And once you get to a certain level, if we're talking about masters folk, you kind of have to play on a secondary dimension. And then when it comes to the higher folks, they're 3, 4, 5, right? They're playing on a higher level. You need to be able to, let's say our opponent is doing a lot of backup and then drive rush at you, right? In those cases, right, if your opponent is, you should be ready to check, right? This means that if they decide to jump at you, maybe you don't have the crispy anti-air DPs yet, so maybe it's just gonna look like this for now. But at the very least, if they decide to even consider pressing that, turning green, you know, if they consider turning green, they're getting checked. They're getting checked, right? That way, now they have to rely on other things. So if we're focused upon checking drive rush, that's going to be on the forefront. This is something that I do myself, where if I know my opponent is going to drive rush at me, and I know that a lot of people, like, even if you try to do it, you may still fail. This is also very true, and you also have to keep that in mind. But it's definitely something you should be putting at the forefront of your mind. If you know your opponent here is uncomfortable and they'll play the neutral or whatever have you, and they'll just jump at some point, and you're so confident that they're gonna jump, why put yourself here? Now you're forced into a situation to either you have to block it or you have to cross set it, which, you know, a lot of people, including myself, is not great at, right? Still not great at it. But you're forcing yourself into a situation where you have to cross cut. So in that case, right, I'd say to you, why not play this range here, wait for him to do it, and anti-air appropriately. In the case that you want to check your opponent, right, you'll be playing this range here, and then you'll essentially counter poke them or anti-air them, I'm sorry, for their attempt to jump at you, right? If you focus upon that, wait for your opportunity, right? You're playing this game right here, while simultaneously, right, the key thing here is that if your opponent is just waiting for an opportunity to drive rush, you're still standing in that low forward range while simultaneously looking for that option, right? So you're right here. If they decide to stick something out, you're ready for it. If they decide to jump at you, you're also ready for that option. And if you feel as though you were hyper focused on the anti-air and getting the DP, and because of that your ability to focus on the ground buttons, starts to suffer, if you feel like your ground buttons are starting to suffer, then as a result you need to switch to this. Then tighten up in this regard. There's no shame, okay? Stop letting people tell you, oh, if you can't anti-air DP, then you can't really anti-air. Want them. Take the game, get your points. Stop thinking about the pride of the FG. That don't matter, okay? It really doesn't matter. All right, so if you feel like your ground buttons and you're not really ready to check the crush medium kick, you need to reevaluate what you're doing, right? This means that this needs to become a priority. At least you can go into the other modes, okay? You can go into the other modes and practice your DPs, but I say get your anti-airs where you can, okay? People feel a lot of pride when it comes to, oh, I can anti-air DP, but you still suck. So what now? Right? So with that being said, right, this is something that I want you to focus on, right? As you get a little bit higher, I would suggest increasing it, right, or practice increasing it, because it'll allow you to get better at all of these things that are very annoying to deal with, right? So we can also talk about, let's say we're dealing with Ken, right? If we're dealing with a Ken player and we know he's been showing us the basic options, right? You need to, if you know that your opponent like loves doing, if you know that your opponent loves doing this, right, and running in there, right, what are your options, right? Obviously you can try and do that, right? You can also, if you don't have one, you can push them off of you, right? Now the goal is that although you're pushing them off of you, you gotta be mindful of how much drive gauge you're using. So this is all part of the mental stack. Now the mental stack also includes how much meter you have and how much meter they have, because how much meter you have dictates the options that you can use, and how much meter they have dictates what options they can use. What do I mean? Okay, this is the last one I'm going to go over, but essentially if your opponent is showing you or has 2 bars of meter, they're not going to do this, right? They're not, if they're stupid they will, but they're not going to do this. A smart opponent won't. because now they put themselves in a situation. So let's say, for instance, right, even if you blocked it, I decide to commit to block and I block the situation. What now? You see what I mean? Like, what now? Let's put it on standard to show my point. Right? You get the throw, I block it out. What now? Now you're here. Can't drive rush at me. You've gotten your successful throw, right? Now what? Can't do anything. Now the situation changes, right? If your health bar is about here, right? And then now they're going for, right? Now the situation starts to change because now you're about one shot away, and even though he doesn't have any meter, all he needs to do is touch you with the light or a correct space button, and you die. See how it changes based on what you have available to you, right? And if your opponent decides that, or you know what, he does not have enough meter to do it, sometimes your opponent will just lean into neutral skips like this one, right? And in the case that your opponent is like realizing the fact that they don't have access to actually, let me do this correctly. I'm gonna make him mash the eye immediately afterwards. So if you feel like your opponent is just gonna go for something like that, then why not, right? Then you know that he's not gonna do low forward drive rush. And if he does, he's just putting himself in a worse situation, provided you have enough health to survive it. Anyways, I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about the mental stack and what actually goes into it, right? Because I understand that it is definitely something hard to get your mind to grasp, and it's going to be very difficult, especially if you've just been pressing buttons and kind of gambling your games away, right? The whole point of adding mental stack or incorporating mental stack into your play is to make sure that you're not gambling your games, right? You don't want to be gambling your games, because when you gamble your games, you're increasing the amount of opportunity for you to lose, right? You're making it a 50-50, if not a 60-40 in your favor, right? Depending on how you play. If you're just holding up all the time, anytime you're uncomfortable, you're gambling, right? If you're just holding drive rush all the time, you're gambling. Okay, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a good one, guys. Peace.